Well, the student is considered one of Anton Chekhov's finest stories. He was very prolific as an essayist, as a short story writer, and as a playwright during his short lifespan, 1860 to 1904. He died of tuberculosis, something we treat today, something that killed so many people 120 years ago. And as we move into the story, I just want to give you a little bit of background here. Sometimes stories work by plot. This one doesn't have a plot. Sometimes stories work and deliver a great deal of meaning almost as a meditation. And they do this, in this case, by manipulating the scene and the setting and the historic reference. So this is a fascinating story that way. And what it is, in the simplest way, it's about a young seminarian, that is somebody who's studying in the Eastern Orthodox Christian Church to be a minister. And he's going home to visit his parents for Easter. And on the way home to visit his parents, the warm spring day, you got to watch that skip page there, turns into a spring day that still has a lot of winter in it. So as night falls, he warms himself by the fire with these two old peasant women who are just a picture of poverty. Remember, when Russia freed the serfs in 1860, roughly 90% of the Russian population were serfs. That would be peasants, somewhere between slavery and peasantry. They had few rights, no status whatsoever, and they pretty much were obligated to work for whomever it was who owned the land underneath their feet. And so he walks by these women, and then he continues walking by on his way home after telling the story of St. Peter. And it's all about his inner meditation. And so much of the meaning in this story comes through imagery. So that's the plot line. Student walking home, stops by the campfire, warms up, tells the beaten down peasant women the story of St. Peter's betrayal of Jesus Christ, and then moves along with this revelation that he moved these peasant women so much, he felt like he was somebody who was carrying a truth deep within him. And as he put it, the truth that he imparted through the Bible is linked with the present by an unbroken chain of events flowing one out of the other. That is, going from his time, sometime late in the 1800s, all the way back to the time of the Bible, the time of Christ's life, 1 to 33 AD. So that's the story in the larger way. But what you want to keep out for here is that it's really a story about faith, the student's faith. Is it an illusion? Is he just so young and full of hope he can't see reality? Or is it reality? And how firm is it? So we just don't know here. But one of the ways that faith is given perspective, if you will, is that if you think of warm and spring and summer being faith, then you think of cold and winter being darkness. And so there's a playoff between this time of the year where the shadow of winter hangs over the student, but yet there is the promise of spring, however short-lived. You want to watch that. That's one way his faith is introduced, by the scenery. That is, there's every reason to celebrate the warmth, but there is the surrounding darkness. So you want to look for those lines where the scenery adds a little bit of depth to the question of whether or not faith belongs in the world. And then the next part here, this is a really quick gloss of Russian history. And you've got Rurik, who helped found Russia in about the 9th century, Ivan the Terrible, the 16th century, Peter the Great, the 17th and 18th centuries. This is the history of Russia going back now 1,200 years, and basically saying the poverty that people feel today in Russia, and this is, 1880, 1890 in Russia, the grinding, miserable poverty hasn't changed for over 1,000 years. So there's kind of an answer for faith. If nothing's changed for 1,000 years, how can it possibly change now? What a dark and horrible place this is. And then another answer by the scenery, just like you had cold and warm, is light and dark. Obviously, light would be faith, its place in the world, and darkness would be, well, the opposite of faith, that darkness. And so again, you get the play of light, these lone windows in the middle of surrounding darkness. Maybe that's the place faith has in the world. And so you see how the scenery kind of echoes the question, where is faith in life? And it continues. He goes to talk with the old women. There's kind of a pencil sketch of miserable poverty. One of them beaten badly by her husband. And if another one is wearing a man's coat, which is kind of a coded reference to, somebody whose husband is dead, maybe in one of the wars, because the poor people were, given the choice, we're going to shoot you here, we're going to take you out to the battlefield. So maybe that's what it is that I believe there's an army jacket there, so maybe that's what it is. We don't know for sure, but it's a picture of poverty. And then the story of St. Peter, who, as we know from the Bible, was crushed for having betrayed Jesus 3 times before the cock crowed. That's what's relived here. And so that's certainly a dark episode. But at the same time, St. Peter is the person who gave the birth to the Catholic Church, which spread Christianity around the world for well over 1,500 years. So you have, still does today, but then we have Protestants and Lutherans and others coming in, actually about 14 and 1,500. So St. Peter is suffering, the complete loss of connection to Jesus through betrayal, and yet at the same time, he becomes the rock of the church. So is that what it is? Is it is one's place with God in this story? Is it something that's crushed by one's deeds, or is there redemption? It's not in the story, but Peter will go on and pretty much be the rock of the church. So again, everything is kind of light and dark, light and dark. And then he leaves these women whom he has moved. One of them cries, and the other one, certainly, Lucera, looks moved in some way, as if she were enduring an intense pain. Something touched her. But Vasilisa was moved to tears by the story he told them. So this, again, is about faith. And that's where he gets that wonderful line where he feels that if he's coming from the heart and telling the stories of the Bible, as he will as a minister, then the truths of almost 2,000 years ago can waken up the hearts of people today. So that's a real inspiring paean or praise of faith, but at the same time, it's in the context of such great desolation, this poverty that's been grinding people up for 1,200 years. It's like that lone little window surrounded by darkness, the student's faith. And that really is the question of the story. And then he's moving on back home to where his parents are ground up by poverty and tuberculosis. And at the same time, he has this feeling, because he moved the women so much, this feeling is almost everything is possible because of the faith he carries within him. So that really is the story. It's not about the events, but it's about the cold, warm, light, dark, hopeless peasants, inspired young student, this back and forth asking, almost asking, does faith have any place in the world? Or are we just kidding ourselves? And so I want you to read the story a few times, and then I'm going to ask you to comment on how the scenery, the temperature, and the scenes, specifically the scene with the two peasant women, all add a dimension to that question of whether or not faith has a place in the world, or if we're just kidding ourselves. And the beautiful thing about the story is it doesn't answer it. It just opens it up. It's as if Chekhov is saying, I want you to think of this. I don't know. But at least if we both think of it, maybe we'll come to understand what a mystery it is, this business of faith. I hope this helps you.